This is the cheapest version of Apple's cheapest laptop, the new 2020 MacBook Air. Now this one is important, so let's hope they got it right. The MacBook Air is Apple's most popular laptop, and the base model is arguably the most important because there are a ton of people who will just buy whatever the cheapest MacBook that's on sale whenever they're looking for one is. And that's this. This is the new 2020 update of the MacBook Air. It's not quite a redesign, but it is a very significant refresh. And there are two main things that they've changed that I think make a huge difference in this computer. Number one, they decreased the starting price. They're back to the $999 starting price that they had been using for a couple of years on the older generation. When they switched to the Retina MacBook Air and the butterfly keyboard, they increased the price. It was $1199 in 2018 and $1099 in 2019, and now we're back to $1,000 even. Now, that alone isn't a huge update. In fact, it's not an update at all. But what is very important is, much like the 16-inch MacBook Pro, they have doubled the storage options and they've added the scissor switch Magic Keyboard. So 256 gigabytes of storage plus a much better keyboard and $100 less. That is huge. So as with most Apple products, there's not a lot to unbox here. We just have the MacBook itself and a teeny tiny little charger brick on this small 7-watt processor. And really, there's not a lot that's different from the outside here. This new MacBook Air is, I think, 0.5 millimeter thicker than the one it replaces. So in that sense, it does differ slightly to the treatment the 16-inch MacBook Pro was given, in that it is not significantly or even noticeably different from the exterior. The footprint is the same, the dimensions are the same, the weight is pretty much the same. The only major difference in design on this computer is this new Magic Keyboard, which is as glorious as ever. So what are the specs of this bone stock base model? Well, this has a 1.1 gigahertz Core i3, that's a dual core processor. It has 8 gigabytes of 3733 megahertz LPDDR4X RAM. It has Intel Iris Plus graphics and a 256 gigabyte SSD. Now, when this thing came out a couple of days ago, people were wondering why in the world did they put a Core i3 on a $1,000 laptop? And on its face, that does seem laughable. But more importantly, the people that buy the base model MacBook Air don't care at all what processor is in it. The MacBook Air is the MacBook for the masses. And as such, it's not super duper important how much horsepower is in it. Now, what's new for this year is if you do step it up to the higher end processors, you can actually get quad-core processors in the MacBook Air. You can add $100 to this exact model and get a quad-core 1.1 gigahertz Core i5, or you could add $200 to this base model and get a 1.2 gigahertz Core i7. It's a pretty major improvement. However, there is one thing that hasn't been improved, and that's the bezels. The footprint is the same, which means the display is the same, which means the bezels are the same, and there's too many of them. They really got to cut down on these bezels. I mean, it is 2020, this is a brand new computer, and these bezels are not acceptable. So with the caveat that if you want to do anything intensive on a MacBook Air, you're gonna need to go for the quad-core processor. Let's find out how this bone stock base model Core i3 model performs. If we look at the Geekbench 5 scores, we can see that there are noticeable gains in the multi-core test compared to last year's Air, and it beats out most other dual-core MacBooks. But obviously, it gets crushed by quad cores of all shapes and sizes. Interestingly enough, this test shows the i5 MacBook Air nipping at the heels of a quad-core MacBook Pro, but don't be fooled. The Air is not built for extended multi-core use. The chassis, just like the old model, is partially passively cooled. This means the fan doesn't blow air through the heatsink so much as it blows air near it. The fan is designed purely for ventilation. There's no heat pipe or fin stack to actively cool the CPU. As such, when running Cinebench, we get very different results. The temps steadily climb until reaching the T-junction of 100 degrees Celsius, and they just sit there. The fan cannot cool the thing down. The CPU sits at 2.2 GHz, double the base clock, but well shy of its 3.2 max turbo speed, and it chugs along, giving us a score of 640, almost exactly the same as the outgoing model. Due to these thermal limitations, this design really doesn't stand a chance in any sort of extended workload. So if you thought this was going to be a cheaper alternative to the 13-inch MacBook Pro with similar performance in those quad-core processors, I hate to burst your bubble, but it's not gonna happen. Even if the performance is comparable, you're going to bake your chip to death with it sitting at 100 degrees Celsius all the time, and you're gonna probably go deaf because of the very loud fan. In Unigen heaven, these 10th gen chips stretch their legs when compared to the older models. We get a much improved score of 164 compared to just 102 on the outgoing model in the Extreme preset. Both are pretty paltry, but it does put the new MacBook Air close to the GT650M graphics that you'd find in a 2012 15-inch MacBook Pro. But let's be honest here, the MacBook Air is the quintessential Ultrabook, so you're not going to buy this to be a professional video editor or use AutoCAD on. The performance on this base model might not be a whole lot better, but the improvements mainly come in quality of life. Much like the 16-inch MacBook Pro, the speakers received a significant update this time around, and they sound amazing. I'll see you all in the next video. The Air also gets a 3-mic array just like the MacBook Pro did, and I have to say they sound pretty good, although the MacBook Pro definitely sounds better, and the MacBook Air has a terrible, terrible webcam. Really all Macs, except for the iMac Pro, have pretty terrible webcams. Speaking of comparisons to the 16-inch MacBook Pro, the Air has the same matte finish separated Touch ID button, but it's weirdly small. It's a lot smaller than the 16-inch. I don't get it. But I'd like to set aside everything that I've just said and go back to the beginning of this video. 256 gigabytes of storage plus a much, much better keyboard and $100 less. That is huge. That's really all there is to it. That's the headline, folks. More storage, better keyboard, less cost. Those three things are massive to the target demographic for this MacBook Air. The Core i3, it sucks, but it doesn't matter to the people who are buying this. Now, if you are a little bit more tech savvy, as I would imagine most of the people watching this video are, I think the Core i5 is worth the upgrade. Granted, you're not going to be getting the same performance as you would in a MacBook Pro. That's not what the MacBook Air is about, but I think you would absolutely notice those extra cores in short bursts. Multitasking, iMovie, Photoshop, these things will all benefit from those extra cores, not to mention the fact that you're going to get more use out of your laptop. Most people will buy the base model, no doubt. And you can ask them, hey, what processor is in your MacBook Air? And they'll just say,
yes.
But despite the thermal limitations in the Core i3, this is a massive update when you examine the context of what the MacBook Air is. And frankly, I'm very, very excited to see how this translates to the MacBook Pro. Better performance with a better cooled chassis, better speakers, better microphones, better keyboard, and twice the storage. That is a winning combination. So I'm very excited to see what this means for the 13 or 14-inch MacBook Pro. So that'll do it for this video on the 2020 MacBook Air. Let me know what you think about this computer down in the comments below, and as usual, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. please consider following me on Twitter at Luke Miani, and don't forget to join my subreddit, which you'll find linked in the description below. And with that, I'll see you all in the next video.